Today, how a multinational private equity firm makes millions off people applying for visas.
Or even just go onto Google and type in VFS Global, you'll find so many complaints from people. Like, there's so many people out there suffering and like struggling with VFS. And it just felt like, how has the media not paid more attention to this?
An investigation into VFS Global exposes questionable practices and massive profits. I'm David Enders, and this is The Take.
I'm May Bulman. I'm an investigations editor at Lighthouse Reports, where I coordinate investigations into, in particular, borders and migration, but also big tech. And I'm joining you from London.
So, May, we're here to talk about VFS, Visa Facilitation Services, which you've just led an investigation into this company, but a lot of our audience won't necessarily know what they do or what a visa processing service is because maybe they've never had to use one. So first of all, can you just take a step back and explain to us what is VFS and why did the Lighthouse investigate them?
VFS is a visa outsourcing company. It's the biggest in the world, and it's actually the company that kind of started the system of outsourcing visa administration back in 2001.
And these visa applicants are largely in which countries? And they're largely applying for visas to where?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously lots of people around the world apply for visas, but it has to be said that there are countries that have, where people have kind of weaker passports, if you might say. Other countries require them to apply for visas. Whereas if you look at kind of most Europeans and, you know, me as a British citizen, I don't have to apply for a visa for that many countries in the world. But if you're someone from maybe Nigeria or India, you will be required to apply for a visa for more countries. So like inherently, the bulk of people who have to go through this outsourced system are people with the weaker passports. And that's why our kind of main focus was across parts of Africa, Asia, and the Middle East, because we found that that was where most people were affected by this. So essentially, to explain what visa outsourcing means, if someone wants to apply for a visa to come to, say, the UK or to go to France or to the US or wherever, they previously would have to go to the embassy of that country in their country, and then the embassy would kind of take their documents and do all the processing. Now, the kind of majority of countries, particularly in the sort of global north, outsource their visa processing. So companies like VFS, of which, as I said, VFS is the largest, they now have visa centers around the world where people have to go to in order to apply for visas.
VFS Global looks forward to seeing you at one of our premium application centers, designed with you in mind. Only these one-stop shop application centers offer the option of conveniently walking in without a pre-booked appointment and receiving personalized next-day visa service. And
it's important to say that VFS and other outsourcing companies don't make decisions on visas. That's still up to the government which the person is applying to go to, but they do all of the kind of administration around it. We've seen that the process for people applying for visas has got a lot more expensive, and I think we'll talk more about this in this conversation. But they also, VFS charges for additional services, and we've found basically that they have been really pushing these added value services on people. VFS has made a lot of money out of selling these kind of additional services to applicants, as well as making them pay this service fee.
And one thing that I found surprising, and I was aware of this to some extent, but the rejection rates and how much people spend on applying for visas that they don't even then get. One figure is Africans paid $68 million for European visa applications that ended up being rejected in 2024. I mean, can you give us a sense of how much money is spent without anyone even getting a visa? And then people are paying fees on top of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're referring to Lego Collective. They did some brilliant research and onto this, like how much are people basically wasting, how much are people spending on visa applications that then they are rejected for. And it's a huge issue. And I think in all this, like, again, that wasn't kind of specifically what we were looking at, the rejection rates, but actually it's all part and parcel of the same thing. It's when people apply for visas to go to work or to study or to see family. And of course, it's everyone's right to travel, right? They're being confronted with these huge fees and these set fees for the visas, and then these fees on top of that for these additional services and the service fee. And then with all that, they've got a pretty high chance often of being rejected. And often they're rejected for kind of spurious reasons. Like we spoke to a lot of lawyers and applicants themselves who were saying that they got rejected on the basis that like sometimes the government who rejected them claimed that they didn't have enough money to prove that they weren't going to leave. But like often actually they did provide bank statements. And even that kind of whole rule in itself, it's questionable. And also that the process is being made so much harder by having these outsourcing companies doing the processing and the administration and making people pay all this extra money when actually you do kind of need some of these people to come.
What did you find in your investigation to VFS? And can you give us an idea, paint us a bit of a picture? How much does this increase the cost of visas for people? If they even get the visa in some cases?
Yeah, it's a good question because visas themselves are expensive anyway. And then on top of that, the value-added services are very expensive as well. So, I mean, one example is I spoke to an Indian grandmother who made a long journey to the visa application center in Pune, where she lives. She was applying for a visa to see her son and her new granddaughter in Belgium. And it was raining. There'd been like terrible flooding. She really struggled to find a taxi. She was waiting in the rain for a long time. She eventually made it there. And actually she was 15 minutes late. So she was only, she thought she was going to be later than that. She was like, okay, thank goodness, I'm only 15 minutes late for my appointment. But she then got there and she was told, sorry, you're too late. You need to either go home and book another appointment, which she'd already waited months to get that appointment, or you can pay for the premium lounge and you can come in now and go into our premium lounge. And that costed her 35 euros, which, might not sound like a huge amount in parts of Europe, but for her, that was like the monthly cost of her groceries. So that was a huge amount. And she told me that, she didn't feel like she was in a position to argue. And I think a lot of visa applicants are in quite a vulnerable situation when they're applying for a visa because, as you kind of pointed to, the rejection rates are pretty high for a lot of countries. So people are nervous about not getting their visa. And so at that point, when they're going to the visa center with all their documents, they don't want to do anything that would jeopardize their chances of getting the visa. And I think sometimes people still believe that VFS, even though VFS is not the embassy, there's a kind of sense that actually they're still part of the embassy, and that if I don't buy this service that they're telling me I should buy, then, or if I argue with them, then it might jeopardize my chances of getting my visa. But yeah, I mean, it's increased the cost of visas even further for people. That's for sure.
Can you give us a little more background on VFS? Because it was acquired in recent years by a major multinational equity firm, Blackstone, which some people will definitely be familiar with. Were you able to track any kind of change in the before and after of this company being acquired by a capital firm?
Yeah, I mean, to give a little bit of background going further back, so VFS started in 2001 when its now CEO, Zubin Kakaria, kind of convinced the US government to let him do a pilot of this idea of outsourcing visa administration in the US embassy in Mumbai. And then from there, VFS got this contract with the British government, and then other European countries followed. And, since then, VFS has seen extraordinary growth. And then, yeah, as you say, in 2022, so just after the pandemic, Blackstone, this huge private equity firm that I should say is majority owned by a big Donald Trump funder, bought a majority stake in the company. And what we've seen since then is that basically VFS growth has continued. It's made a lot of additional revenue in that time. And we've also seen, which I think is interesting, is that the revenues per visa application have massively increased. I think they've increased by 41% since Blackstone's entry. And that's to say that, the increase in revenues are not the result of more applications, more people traveling, because actually those numbers are staying fairly steady, but they're making more money off each visa applicant, if that makes sense, each visa application. And that speaks to this increased push for selling value-added services. So each applicant is spending more because they're being made to think, so admittedly, some applicants might want to go to the premium lounge or they might want a courier delivery service. But what we've heard from a lot of them and from VFS staff is that these services are pushed onto people. And I should say as well, two former VFS staff told us that they had seen this increase in the push from management to sell value-added services since Blackstone's entrance. But VFS vehemently denied that. We can't say for sure that happened, but that's what a couple of members of staff did tell us.
And the company has denied that. The company has denied upselling or overcharging. What else? What has been its full response to the investigation Lighthouse did?
Yeah, VFS provided a statement. It was actually a statement from their lawyers on their behalf. And they didn't address every single point that we put to them, but their main points were, they're kind of saying it's on the applicant. We're trying to help the applicant. And they said that, applicants are very clearly informed that these services are optional. And it also said that it maintains a zero tolerance policy if there is any coercion or misrepresentation of these services by its staff. They kind of put it on their contracting governments a bit as well. They also said that they're kind of subject to rigorous audits and so on. So yeah, it was a fairly lengthy statement.
And what's your opinion of that statement?
I mean, I think, so it's interesting. From the beginning, we didn't really mention this in our reporting actually in the end, but I actually reached out. We were reaching out to some former staff on LinkedIn, and they got in touch with me, the comms office at VFS, and said, do you want to ask us some questions? So actually I met with their operations manager, and in the end they invited me to go to Dubai to see their kind of headquarters and their like flagship new visa application center in Dubai. So they were kind of open with us from the start, but they were quite surprised actually about our findings. And it's not that we were dishonest with them or anything. And, we really appreciated their transparency. But in the end, what we found was just so, like, the evidence is really so strong that this is happening. Like, basically the figures show that value-added services are a huge part of their, why they're so profitable. And from speaking to dozens of former and current staff there, that's telling you something. And then plus a swathes of applicants who we spoke to as well. Basically, I think their statement was, them trying to kind of to defend themselves. But in the end, I think they knew that what we'd found was, on the whole, kind of they couldn't really argue it, I would say. And yeah, I think it's been interesting since we published last Thursday, seeing the reaction. There's been huge online reaction from particularly applicants, on various social media forums, saying, I'm so glad someone has done this. And like, this has been an issue for so long. And like, they're just so pleased that there's been some kind of proper investigation into it. And we're yet to see kind of what the response from governments, like client governments, will be. We did contact the EU Commission, and they told us that they're going to launch a kind of comprehensive study, I think they called it, into visa outsourcing in Europe. So that's kind of, it's not clear whether that was off the back of our reporting or that they were already planning to do that. But that means that there's clearly some concern about this in the EU.
How many publications were involved in this? I mean, it's a global, you've published it globally in a number of publications. And as I was going through the different articles that were published, there were a few different stories that stood out to me.
Of course, there were so many. And as you say, it was so brilliant actually to be working with. We worked with 14 media outlets kind of spread across the world. And we were very deliberate in starting the reporting process with journalists and media outlets in the countries where people are applying and having the most difficulty. And it's so hard to pick like one case, but I think because also students were quite badly affected, and students were telling us that they just, they've got this position, they've got this place at a university in like France or the UK or Germany, and the VFS process has just meant that they're spending so much more money than they'd planned to spend, but also that there's delays that are created by having this outsourced process, because there's now this like other hurdle that you have to get through. And so people who were speaking to us and saying, oh my God, I'm not going to get there in time for my, to start my studies. And in some cases that would mean that they would lose their place on their, on this, this course that they got onto. So yeah, there were just lots of cases. There was one woman who I actually met in London she wasn't British. I can't remember where she was from, but she was applying from London to go to an EU country, and it was to the funeral of a close friend. And because she couldn't get an appointment because the appointment system was so messed up, she was having to either pay like a couple of £100 or not make it to the funeral of her friend. So there's lots of situations like that where people are just pretty devastated by this. But yeah, we're really grateful to our partners across the world who helped us out with this. I think that was such an important part of this project.
And I meant to ask you, what was the genesis of this project? How did the idea for this reporting come about?
Yeah, well, actually, back in 2019, before I worked for Lighthouse, myself so I was working for The Independent as social affairs correspondent, and my colleague now, who's an investigative reporter at Lighthouse, Margot Gibbs, she was working at Finance Uncovered. We did a piece back in 2019 on looking at the UK contract and how there was huge amounts of money being made by both VFS and the UK Home Office. And now that we're at Lighthouse, where we can do kind of big global investigations, we thought actually this could be a chance to go beyond just the UK and look, see how this is now affecting people. And we'd also seen that Blackstone had taken over. So it just felt like a space that was like requiring more investigation. And then on top of that, I mean, honestly, if you go on any social media really, or even just go onto Google and type in VFS Global, you'll find so many complaints from people. Like there's so many people out there suffering and like struggling with VFS. And it just felt like, how has no one done a proper, how has the media not paid more attention to this? So that, we just felt like it was something that had to be done.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us. We'll leave it there.
Great. Thank you so much for having me.